First of all, full disclosure, I was contacted directly by the company Resin, who asked if I would be interested in testing one or more of their products. At the time, I was not familiar with the company or its products, so I looked over the information on the website, I checked out a few online reviews, and I agreed to do that. In particular, I asked to test the M70 high precision resin, as that looked to have some interesting properties in regards to miniatures and details. So just to have a clean desk here, there are no strings attached. Resin has not asked for any particular favors. I am just doing this as a clean review. As was probably made clear by the introduction, this is about the Resione M70 resin. If you take a look at their website, this is marketed as a high precision resin, with characteristics such as clear and sharp details, a smooth and matte surface, supports that can easily be removed, and low shrinkage and low warp deformation and precise size, all of which are very interesting for miniatures, and especially if you're dealing with multi-part models. But how does all of this stack up? Is it only good on the paper? That is what I will look at in this review. Let's get started. In my experience, most resins takes a bit of dialing in to get just right. In case of the M70, I spent a bit more time than usual. This was caused by a combination of several factors. I would say primary that I didn't pay enough attention to the reference settings provided by Resin from their website. I will link to that in the description. But also by the M70 not being what I would call a beginner's resin. There are some tricky aspects to getting good print results, which are primarily around adhesion to the build plate, ambient temperature in the room where you're printing, and the temperature of the resin itself. To get the best result with the resin, it needs to be between 25 and 35 degrees. There are some things you can do to adjust for that, but if you want the best results, keep within that range. That also means if you're pouring out the resin of the bottle in less than that temperature, it will be very viscous. I would recommend putting the bottle with the resin into a bucket of hot water between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius, 10 to 15 minutes before you intend to start printing. Then you will have a nice viscosity of the resin and it'll be easy to handle. Furthermore, if you can keep a fairly consistent temperature of the resin throughout your print, you will get the best results. Personally, I have a heating unit on my resin, so it's between 26 and 30 degrees, and that has worked really well. When it comes to the settings of the 3D printer, as mentioned, Resin has a very good overview of these on their website. But I would also say for the Mono X that I have, I needed to tweak the settings a bit still to have a good result. At 5 microns, I was closer to 3 seconds than the 2.5 suggested by the manufacturer, and actually at 3 microns, I was around the 2.4, 2.5 that they are suggesting. So you will probably have to do a bit of dialing in to reach the best result for your printer. I had really good results using the frozen exposure finder, link to that also in the description, and I would certainly also recommend set up a little sheet so you can track the various settings that you're changing. At least if you, like me, are hunting for the best possible print results, I ended up having no less than 12 test prints before I found the ones I liked the most. I will just share the two profiles at 3 and 5 microns on the screen now that I have used to print successfully. These are also available from the public Litchi profile repository. Once you have your perfect print, we come to the post-processing. Here, Resin has two recommendations that I would strongly suggest you follow, both because I've seen what happens when you do it and also what happens when you don't. Your baseline, of course, is to clean using isopropyl alcohol, and here I would strongly recommend that your PPE includes both gloves and also a respirator that takes into account that IPA is a solvent that will do nothing good for your gray matter if you are not careful. You can use one of the mini washers for the initial wash of your model, but it is also highly recommended that you do also a final scrub using, again, IPA and a toothbrush, as the composition of the M70 does that there can be a residual resin that you simply can't get off using the washer. Once you are done with the wash, use a compressed air source that can be from an airbrush to blow dry the surface of the model. This will ensure that you don't get any annoying white stains that you can sometimes see. On the subject of post-processing, or maybe more cleaning, there is one issue I would like to point out, and that is due to the high pigment level in the M70. It colors absolutely everything that you use to clean it with, and also leaves some residue behind. Like me, you are very likely to have more than one type of resin, and I would recommend simply having at least two separate containers for doing the initial cleaning, which is where most of the residual resin will come off. Otherwise, you risk doing some cross-contamination. I have seen at least pigments and similar on some of my other prints after I have cleaned them in the same IPA as I did with the M70. Another thing you need to be aware of is that you need to clean your resin vat quite carefully, maybe letting it drip off a little bit extra to get that additional resin out. I have seen at least cases where there were still residual M70 left in my vat when I switched to another brand, and then we get some cross-contamination. I don't know if it necessarily affects or weakens the other prints, but you cannot always be sure what happens when you intermix resins from two different companies. For my printed examples, I have miniatures from two companies, Durgan's Paint Store and Cobra Modes. I am affiliated with none of these and had used my own money for buying. I chose Durgan Paint Store because I like his style, but also because he produces some of the finest 28-32mm 3D models that I have knowledge of. Cobra Mode was similarly chosen because they produce some really interesting miniatures that has intricate details that would be a good challenge for printing. Unfortunately, all of my printed examples were cleaned before I got a compressed air source, so you will be able to see some of that white residual surface stuff that I talked about. All models were printed at 3 microns to get the best level of details. All my prints come from the Anycubic Mono X, but I must say I would love to see what I could do with this resin and an 8K printer. Hopefully that will come at a later date. Common for all of my printed examples are that they are quite rough. I have actually not done a whole lot of processing because this is mainly to test out the resin and its printing properties. However, when it comes to the cleanup of the miniatures, there are 2 things I would like to point out. One is that the miniatures cure quite hard, so they are a bit brittle, also meaning that you should be careful when you cut and saw into them, mainly to avoid that you chip parts off. Second part is that you get an overall very nice, very clean surface on these prints, but you can make it even nicer with sanding where it's needed. I have used a Korn 180 and a Korn 800, and I got a surface texture that I would say was actually very close to marble. To round off this review, I have spent quite some time getting to know the M70 resin, and where my go-to resins usually is the Cerea Navy Grey and the Frozen 4K Aqua Grey. The M70 is certainly an addition to that club and a very good choice if you want very fine, very crisp details. Like most resins, it has both pros and cons. However, on the con side, this is mainly about this resin not being a beginner's resin. You need to pay a little extra attention on the details, put in a little extra effort, but the payback is some of the cleanest and most detailed prints I have seen come out of my machine, so I would say it's probably worth it. And that brings me to what is probably the final point, namely, what does this cost? I've looked into the price in 2 regions, Europe and the US. In the US, the price for 1 kilo of product is around $55. In Europe, it is around 60 euros. That is around 10-15 euros more than I usually pay for resin for miniatures. But I would also say that price bracket is not unheard of when it comes to specialty resins that has special properties, so it is not at all unreasonable. But also keep your eye out for good bargains. Sometimes there can be serious money saved by buying more than one bottle. And that pretty much sums it up for me. I hope this review has given you some insight into using the M70. I hope you will get some excellent prints if you choose to take the M70 and put it in your printer. Happy printing out there.